Why do some firms, a select few, grow twice as fast as everybody else and they do it every single year?
After 25 years and dealing with, believe it or not, over 10,000 law firms and attorneys, I saw a little bit of everything. First thing is they're running themselves like a business. Success isn't accidental. Continued success is definitely not accidental. And they say, I just throw it in a drawer and don't look at it because it's all Greek to me. I cannot tell you the hundreds, it's actually into the thousands of law firms I've gone into where I said, show me your last marketing report. And they show me a report. What is the purpose of reporting? It's to really identify the state of what something is in based on data that actually tells the story. A lot of times I'll talk to a firm and they're growing like crazy. And when I actually crunch the numbers, they're growing non-profitably. So they're taking on more cases, more stress, more clients, more, all of these things. They're stressing a bunch of things out, but they're actually not making any more money. Growth doesn't just happen by throwing a bunch of money at marketing. And that's one of the biggest myths. You need to be using technology because if you don't, you will be left behind.
Hey everyone, Jake from FirmPilot here, founder, CEO of FirmPilot AI. Really excited about today's call. I'm extra pumped because number one, we're going to talk about something interesting. Why do some firms, a select few, grow twice as fast as everybody else and they do it every single year? But more importantly, I have a really good friend of mine on today, Peter Webb, who was one of the founding members of Scorpion, was literally there when it was 2 employees to 1,000 plus, has been in this industry for 25 plus years. I call him all the time, ask questions because he's seen thousands and thousands of firms grow from 0 to 1. So Peter, welcome. Excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Jake. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So Peter, first thing I want to ask you, because I know why you started Firm Performance. You're no longer at Scorpion. You started your own consulting business. But for everybody else, why did you start Firm Performance? I just think it's a really cool story.
Great question. So after 25 years and dealing with, believe it or not, over 10,000 law firms and attorneys, I saw a little bit of everything. And unfortunately, a lot of attorneys don't have the guidance that they need with how to operate as a business with efficiency, not only operationally, but how they spend money, how they implement marketing, the partners and the vendors and the providers that they use to get there, how to really leverage internal resources and staff and personnel. And so I followed my passion, which is going into a law firm and really understanding what is the health of that law firm and then what can be done to improve it so they get better results. And at the end of the day, they can help more people, which is the whole name of the game from a get-go. So that's why I started Firm Performance, and it's been fantastic thus far. And now let me turn the tables on you. I know that you have created and founded FirmPilot. Why don't you tell us why you started FirmPilot?
Yeah. So you know this story, of course, really funny. My background's in what we like to call natural language processing. In school, I studied how to make machines understand voice and text. It was way simpler back then. We were cheering if we could build an algorithm that said if that was a person, place, or thing. It's come a long way with things like ChatGPT. But anyways, I was lucky enough to have a different AI company using NLP, completely different ecosystem, not law, not marketing. Grew that company for 8 years, was lucky enough to have some success, sell out of it. And after that was just kicking the tires, figuring out what to do next in life. My brother, as you know, Peter, is a personal injury attorney in Miami, one of the most competitive markets, different billboard every 5 feet. He wanted to grow. He didn't want to just be referral-based forever. He wanted multiple channels bringing in good cases and more cases. He worked with 4 different marketing agencies. Unfortunately for him, there are some great ones, but he didn't get so lucky. It was the same thing each time, beautiful website, ads, social media, and these funky reports that he would get once a month that said, woohoo, 200 new keywords. The only thing that matters is cases signed. So he didn't want to sign with a 5th agency, and he decided to ask me for help with my newfound free time after I left my last company. First attempt was to use ChatGPT. That failed miserably. Doesn't know the laws that well, and it writes this high-level fluff content that we know Google doesn't really care about. So we built our own models. We did what we know best, built our own AI. One that curates rich legal data from cases, court opinions, videos, and the other tracks your competitors, other firms' entire marketing portfolio. It actually crawls it every 90 minutes, their ads, their blogs, their social media, and says, here's the plan of attack based on data. And it worked. Our whole story is if you Google to this day, Miami Uber accident lawyer, he ranks number one. It's the most valuable piece of real estate he's ever owned. And that was our light bulb moment. We're really lucky to meet people like you, work with more than 100 firms now. We just closed another round of financing, 12 million raised that was led by Thomson Reuters. So just took an idea by solving a problem for my brother, and now we're doing it for firms across the country. Yeah. So it's a really cool story and something that sticks out to me coming from a different world. You've been in not just legal marketing, but the business of growing law firms for more than 2 decades. And I come from AI, startup, VC world. VCs never wanted to touch legal tech. They thought the market wasn't big enough, it wasn't sexy, and all these firms are just pen and paper. Obviously, that's completely changed. You see so many awesome startups, so much VC money coming into legal tech. And I think I know why. You have this new generation of firms and attorneys like my brother who don't just want to be an attorney, they want to be a business owner. But can you talk about this shift happening from, I don't just want to go case to case, I want to, the magic word, scale. Can you say why that's happening and what you see?
Absolutely. So it's only getting more and more competitive. The reason why is older school law firms that preceded when advertising was even allowed to be done. And so we have an old school group of some incredible trial attorneys that rely on a referral network, and they're, in their latter part of their career. And they're seeing newer, younger law firms come about and leverage the internet to get cases, and cases that typically would have gone to them. And so they're starting to convert. They would be, considered the late adopters in the bell curve of who adopts new technologies and, new innovations. And so we're getting this flood of older school firms. There's younger firms that are coming into the mix. And then there is, speaking of venture capital money, there is money being infused into the industry as well by, entities that are incredibly savvy business individuals, and they're coming in seeing that there's an opportunity there. So competition's getting fierce. And so growth is looking to the future of how do we maximize, how to get cases, how to protect those cases, how do we make sure we're future proof, and spending the correct amount to actually get those cases. And so growth is of interest to everyone. The problem is growth doesn't just happen by throwing a bunch of money at marketing. And that's one of the biggest myths, one of the biggest errant thought processes that I go into a law firm to see. They think, I'll just throw a bunch of money at advertising and it will fix all the problems. And it really doesn't. It has to do with how well are you running your firm as a machine, and how efficient is that, and how are you using reporting to really define what are the areas that are doing well and what are the areas that are not doing well. So those are some of the things that I've seen, and I know, and you and I talk about this all the time. And so, I mean, I would love to hear from you. What do you see in terms of when firms are wanting to grow and they, think of one thing versus another?
There is a huge paradigm shift. I think the market's just gotten so crowded that I don't want to say it was easy. And, I'm not an attorney. I just think it was more, let's say, possible to thrive off referrals. And now we meet firms all the time and say, we have a great referral network, but also to their point, they did some sort of networking and marketing. They hustled to get that referral network. It's not as natural. There unfortunately is more time, more money, more resources that has to go into even building a referral network. It's just gotten so competitive. So I think everybody just feels hungrier to grow. And the other personal belief I have is, and this is similar from the world I come from of startups. So many founders think it happens overnight because on social media, you see all these success stories, 0 to $1 billion in 10 months, in 2 years. But for every one of those, there are 100 or 500 startups that didn't pan out. And I feel it's similar here because this more modern take on law firms. I mean, we see firms on LinkedIn and Facebook and Meta. We've talked about this all the time, talking about how they grew to 8-9-figure firms. And there are thousands of other attorneys seeing that it is possible. So it's not just that it's, number one, got more competitive. This switch has gone off in their head that says it is possible to not just be an attorney, it's possible to be a CEO. Because in this world of social media and overwhelming content, it's jammed in front of our eyes all day long that you can build this machine, this conglomerate, this business, this enterprise, not just a firm. It's so prevalent now that people see what is possible. That's my theory. And building off of that and kind of segueing into the main point of this, we see so many firms that are turning into 8-9-figure firms, not overnight, but freaking fast. But for every one of those, there are hundreds, thousands that aren't getting it. We'll start broad and then we'll niche down. But is there a high level theme or a line in the sand of what separates the firms that get it? Year over year, they're doubling, tripling versus so many that they're trying to spend the time and money to grow, but they're just not.
I would say absolutely. Their first thing is they're running themselves like a business. So let's talk about that for a minute, because everyone who is an attorney went to law school to practice law. But the business of running a law firm is very, very different. There's financial aspects to it. There's marketing aspects to it. There are business aspects to it, which all play into what's your offering, what's your mission statement, what's your vision, what's your goal, what's your budget, how are you tracking those things? And so success isn't accidental. Continued success is definitely not accidental. Someone can get a case, fall into a bunch of money through a referred case, let's say if it's a contingency fee, and then they throw it into marketing. I've seen more horror stories of that not working than it actually working, because it's more of a hope than a strategy. They're hoping that it would work. And the problem that I see very often is the law firm and the managing partners, or those that are running the law firms, are not educated in all the things that they could and should be doing. And so they're grasping at straws. And let's take a minute and think about this. Let's say you are an individual that's great in a courtroom, but you don't really know what to do with your business sense other than your gut instinct on it. And you then say, I want to do digital marketing. Guess what? They're going to call, let's say, 2, 3, 4, 5 different results that maybe Google offers, and maybe 1 or 2 that were referred to them from people they know. Guess what they're going to receive? 6, 7 different sales pitches that are all those agencies that are singing their own praises. So here's an individual who doesn't have an education in this, doesn't know who to trust, doesn't know what to spend. And then they get pitched, and then they get burned, and then they go from one to the another, to the next, to the next, to the next. Especially if it's a really, really long contract, and it's, if the dollars are being invested in odd places and they don't know where it's being put. These are some of the reasons why people have had horror stories and it hasn't worked well. And so really, I think also the timing of what you're doing and what FirmPilot is doing is, I think it's actually really honest, which is, hey, this is what we do. We're going to let you peek behind the curtain, because I have clients that use you. And in fact, one client that receives, 12 to 15% of their traffic from one of the blogs you did, that's unheard of. That's a really impressive statistic, because there is a train of thought that exists in the industry that blogs are dead. And it's not the blog, it's the one writing the blog. So, I would love to hear a little bit more on how you've been able to crack that code a little bit at a high level, because I think that that's really important for people to hear. Is you're not just another agency out here to sell you with some, throwing the word AI around. You actually do bona fide work.
Yeah. And I have a question that you made me think of that I'm going to come back to. Something that I don't know the answer to at all, but it's something I've been talking about with my brother. I'm going to pause there and answer your question. We're more a data company than we are a marketing company. That's what we geek out on all day long. Now, I'm a computer engineering grad. Our team, is mostly developers. We have amazing people who aren't engineers and client success and strategy and finance, but we're a technology company. And at the end of the day, there absolutely is a time and place for AI. It can't do everything. We admit that. However, it's not random when Peter Googles for new guitar or hotel or best restaurant near me, which results show up at all. And it's actually getting less random. Google's goal is to keep you as addicted to that supercomputer, or what I like to call a tracking device, in your pocket as long as possible, like this. How does it do it? It personalizes your search. What we want to do is use that data to get your site, your ads, your social media in front of your most ideal, profitable clients and cases. I mean, they literally know who was in a fender bender versus who was in a catastrophic injury. Location data, search history, demographic data, motion data. It's not 100%, but it's scary how accurate it is. And if we can harness that data, we can look at what are the levers that move content or an ad up and down. So when we simulate, what we do literally is we simulate hundreds, thousands of these guys' IP addresses. We're not guessing how to do marketing. So if we simulate thousands of searches with different IP addresses of the keywords we're going after, see the content, ads, how they move up and down, we can gather all this data, positive and negative markers. So like that shared client, this specific piece of content, this isn't what our gut tells us looks pretty or sounds good. This is what the data says gives us the highest probability of success. And we tell everybody, doesn't matter how much data and how much AI you have, there's zero guarantees in this. There are zero guarantees. We are super conservative when it comes to estimates. However, it's going to give us the highest probability of success and the highest ceiling. And we follow the data and it works. That was a, great example. But I want to go back to my question.
Okay.
So you mentioned something that is key and so obvious. Firms these days aren't just firms. The great ones especially operate like businesses. So my brother was completely referral-based, solo attorney, and he's grown. Questions come up. Does that mean, he realizes, he acknowledges, he doesn't try to be the SEO expert, the PPC expert. I think that's where firms fail. They try to do everything. I would never try to be an attorney. I stay in my lane. He stays in his lane. Does he go hire a COO? Does he go hire a CFO, an internal marketing person that is validating, is this marketing vendor agency telling us the truth? Like, who's that first hire? And not just who's that first hire, when do you make it? Like, how do you build a firm beyond just hiring more attorneys to handle a growing caseload?
So typically what you want to do from a business stance is understand what the infrastructure is of your existing size firm, what type of cases, what growth looks like, how full are the dockets? Are you at near bursting, or do you have plenty of room for growth? Usually there's a scaled approach of when you need a COO, and it's usually way later into the growth and the health of a firm. When you need a CFO, just as an example, a CFO is really coming in as a chief finance officer to understand how the money's coming in, how the money's coming out, and building projections to the future to make better decisions into the future. And that's different from, let's say, a controller. A controller is someone who's looking at usually historical financial data and up to current, and kind of making recommendations of certain decisions that are going from there. But a controller is still reliant on other executives to provide them with data so they can think, as a team towards what direction to go from there. So it really is contingent on where the firm is at, what they're running into. One thing I really like them to look at is opportunity cost. By hiring this person at whatever price point, what are we missing by not having them? What are we missing by having them based on cost? And look at it from an investment stance. It's going to be 6 figures to bring this person on, but with what that person will do, will be able to scale into the 7 figures in profitability. That's a no-brainer, right? So really understanding who is in your current organization, what are the roles and responsibilities, what's the job description of those individuals, how are you tracking the success of what those individuals are doing, and are they on point or are they bleeding into other departments and other divisions, right? It's getting a really good transparency into what does the firm look like as a business. And sometimes having a consultant come in could be a good idea. If you read a bunch of books, there's a bunch of books out there that could simplify the process if you guys are ready to roll up your sleeves and do it yourself. But at the end of the day, it's taking stock of where you're at, identifying the future state of your firm. Let's say over 3 to 5 years. Are you trying to grow? Are you trying to improve the quality index? Sometimes it's, I want to take fewer cases, but I want to take higher end cases. So answering some of those questions would be key to answering that question.
Totally. So it doesn't sound like there's a silver bullet or a magic pill of, hey, this is the second hire. It's what piece are you trying to scale to the business? So I know with firms we've met, my brothers and dozens of our clients, hiring is emotional because this isn't some big enterprise company where you're just doing it off a balance sheet or an IT budget or a marketing budget. It's literally coming out of the attorneys, the owners of the firm pocket. And I'm sure you deal with that because you consult firms on growth and scaling and the pain points. How do you tell someone who like, hey, you're going to take one less vacation this month or you're not going to get that summer home because what's that evaluation process and how do you tell an attorney it's time to do this and what's that, I guess, framework for evaluating when to hire and who to hire and really understanding, are you ready? Because of course you don't want to hire too soon. So what's that conversation like?
Well, I've unfortunately made a few mistakes along the way where I told them what they didn't want to hear. And really I got ahead of myself because the truth is the first step is an assessment of what are you trying to do? And then the second question is, are you ready for change? Because sometimes they're not ready for that. And they don't want to give up that vacation, no matter how much more money they could deal with. They don't want to let go someone because they have this iron fist grip on the concept of loyalty, even though it's affecting them negatively and a lot of other people negatively. And so me coming in and telling them, hey, you need to get rid of this or do this or change this and hire this, it's presumptive of me, who's been there for a minute, to come in regardless of what the data suggests, to actually say, hey, what do you want? What is it you're trying to accomplish? That's really the first question. The second is, are you willing to make the sacrifices and the changes necessary to do it? And usually what comes out of that is, in certain regards I am, and in certain regards I'm not. And I say, okay, well, what's that demarcation line look like? What are you willing to do and not? Well, I'm willing to sacrifice more financially, but I'm not going to get rid of personnel. Okay, that's fine. What are your thoughts with training to bring them up to the highest ceiling of what that individual or those people or those certain avenues could do, right? And so it all follows a relatively logical process. But at the end of the day, the thing I learned, having dealt with as many firms as I have, there is no bringing from a current state to an ideal state that applies to everybody. It's bringing from the current state to the ideal state that's relevant and relative to that firm's ideal state. And that might be a little bit of improvement. That might be a lot of improvement, but it really rests in the hands of the nature of the firm, who's managing the firm, the culture of the firm, the vision of the firm. A lot of these factors are the things that define it. So there's only so much I can do other than come in, ask the important questions, and then build out a plan that's realistic to make sure that that implementation occurs.
And you mentioned something a few times. I know I've mentioned it. We need to talk about it because it's our fuel. And we've gone into firms. We have a few shared clients where we've gone in and we just go, oh my goodness, data. We're huge fans of, we don't make decisions. You don't grow any kind of business, a law firm, whatever it may be, by just guessing. That doesn't work. And if it does, it's going to it's going to come to haunt you on the next decision you make. So I'm a small firm. I'm slowly growing. And I'm thinking about, do I, consult with a firm performance, Peter, to think about how do I get to that next level? Just like us, when it comes to marketing, I'm sure you need information to actually say, this is the plan, because we can't just, this is the way the wind's blowing. Is there like a magic framework, or if you had to say to smaller firms that feel I'm having a good year, I really want to make a commitment to getting to that next level, here are the ducks that you have to have in a row. Anyone can buy a Clio, a Filevine, whatever, but what do you have to be tracking? How often do you have to be tracking it? What reports do you have to have set up? Kind of what's that infrastructure for reporting 101 look like?
Okay, good question. It's also very encompassing, because one thing that's unfortunately prevalent in the marketing world and the business world are 5 million different acronyms that no one remembers unless you are in that profession. And so the one that comes to mind is KPI, which is a key performance indicator. All that really means is, how are you tracking the success of that department or that piece? Okay, so let's actually rewind this down to a super, super simple level. I love to simplify things because it makes sure we're all on the same page, and that way everyone can understand what to do. What is the purpose of reporting? It's to really identify the state of what something is in based on data that actually tells the story. If you're gathering data that doesn't tell the story, then it's not good enough, or it's not complete enough. Here's a perfect example. I cannot tell you the hundreds, it's actually into the thousands of law firms I've gone into where I said, show me your last marketing report. And they show me a report, and I say, okay, what's in this? And it says number of visitors to the website. And I say, how helpful is this report to you? And they say, I just throw it in a drawer and don't look at it because it's all Greek to me. And I say, okay, well, why is it not important? And they said, because I don't care about how much traffic. I'm sure it's important, but I don't care about that. I care about how many cases come in the door. And I said, okay, well, let me ask you this question. What is your acceptable cost per case acquisition? How much are you willing to spend to acquire a case? Let's say a motor vehicle that they make $8,000 on. How much are you willing to spend to get that case? They said, Peter, I've never actually thought about that, and I haven't calculated it. I said, that's actually what's important, is that number. So then when you start thinking of who's your marketing partner, who's your agency, and are they willing to work with you to tailor the reporting around important metrics that tell the story? At a high level, you want to understand what your money's doing for you and how much money you're making. A lot of times I'll talk to a firm and they're growing like crazy. And when I actually crunch the numbers, they're growing non-profitably because they didn't capture the information that tells that story. So they're taking on more cases, more stress, more clients, more, all of these things. They're stressing a bunch of things out, but they're actually not making any more money. You would actually make them more money to save themselves time, take half the clients. And that's really where that strategy comes in. And that's also where the data-driven decisions come in, is, are you spending in the correct places with the correct people to accomplish your goal and your vision with where you're trying to go?
I love that. The amount of times it's funny, the first metric you talked about, traffic, we go in, we call them vanity metrics. Do we look at it? Yes. It's an indicator. But we've gone into firms where traffic is X, but it's the wrong traffic. So again, what is this number telling us? We have reporting of our business too. And I've touched the stove many times of the shiny, cool charts and reports and graphs. But what do we want to do with this data? What are the decisions we want to make? And let's simplify it down to those 3 or 4 things. I want to know what it cost us to capture a client. What's our client acquisition cost? I want to know, what is the process to get a client? And then, of course, I want to know, how often do they renew and why or why not? So with that data, we make great decisions to improve the business and improve client satisfaction. That's kind of our story that we figured out. And I think it applies to every industry, law, whatever it may be. Know what you're actually going to do with that data. Peter, I see we're hitting the half hour here. I could keep going on and on and on and on. But if you could give, in just the last few minutes here, I know there's no cheat code to growing, but especially for those firms that are getting ready to go to the next stage, whether it's 3 KPIs they have to be, thinking about to grow, the next hire to make, whatever it may be. If you had to give 2, 3 final points that you do on all your first consultations, what would they be?
Well, the first thing I always do is I do a very thorough assessment of the health of the law firm. And I would look at what does their marketing look like, and are those dollars actually translating to signed cases? I then look at intake and I determine, are you delivering a great experience while also capturing important information that really should make its way back to marketing? I cannot tell you how rarely that's done and how important it's done, because that's how course correction can happen. Right? I look at the overall operational efficiency of what is it like for a client to go through the process, and are there any unnecessary bottlenecks? There's obviously a lot of important things, like, are you sending out retainers that are electronic, contracts, so that way you can speed things up and you don't have to do everything in person. But again, I think the reporting is one of the biggest things. Really embrace reporting by department. You can really look at it like, what's the client journey from the point of interest in the firm to calling the firm to becoming a client to exiting as a client, right? What does each one of those phases look like? So for me, I guess answering your question of which KPIs would I look at, it's how many cases am I signing? What is it costing me to sign those cases? Where are the most valuable cases coming from? What does the intake department look like overall from an experience standpoint? And am I trying to grow? And what's that vision look like? So that way you are spending the correct amount of money in the correct channels to get you to that vision. That's where I would probably start looking at. And if you don't have a system in place, I would start looking at that. The last thing that's really important is you need to be using technology. Because if you don't, you will be left behind. And there are too many other firms that are willing to embrace technology to make life easier and do a lot of the heavy lifting. And so that is really important. It's one of the biggest attractive factors that brought me to you in the first place, Jake, is you guys really leverage technology to a viable outcome with replicatable success, which is almost unheard of. It's not like a one-off, it's predictable success. And so those that use you benefit from it. And so I think that that's really important for people to know.
I love that. You just made me think of 5, 6, 7 more questions. So I'm going to bother you to do another one of these in another week or two, because I want to talk about, it drives me nuts when there's this wall between intake and marketing. Well, we're doing marketing, but you didn't tell us XYZ were your best cases, or those take the longest to sign, or have the lowest sign-up rate, or have the highest cost, or the lowest cost. That is gold. That is gold that whether it's FirmPilot or another agency, can use. So it makes no sense to me why that wall exists. And I want to talk to you about, how do we knock it down? I want to talk to you about who owns the reporting at a small firm. Where do you do it? How do you calculate those things? They sound scary, like what does it cost, to get a case? How long does it take to sign it? But they're not. We can demystify that. So what does that look like? So I have so many other questions that we'll definitely get into, even the whole thing. You talked about building a machine, not just getting cases from marketing, but getting it systematic to when you're going to get your next case, and the predictability of where it's going to come from. I love that data-driven stuff. Peter, can't thank you enough. Again, thank you everyone for watching. Jake Soffer, CEO and founder of FirmPilot. Last thing, Peter, you mentioned the assessment. I've seen them before. It's crazy. This looks like a wild, deep consulting assessment that is valuable and just in itself. Someone watching this, say they're interested in finding it. I'm going to put a link to your website, if you don't mind, in the description of this video. Can you give just like 30, 60 seconds? How do they get it? Does it cost anything? What's that process like? Just as like an outro.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In terms of, you could go to the website, www.firmperformance.com. You could fill out a form. You can go to LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Essentially, I evaluate each firm, what they're trying to do, and I assess it on the grounds of what they're trying to do. And so they are all custom done because every firm is a little bit different, and it's also tied to what that vision is. So just reach out to me and then we can find out. I have a team of 6 people on my end that would then dive into what are we doing. We do the assessment. We then prioritize what are the biggest areas that are on fire or need the most help that will turn the most profitability for the firm in the correct direction. And then we build out a plan and a roadmap, and we take it 1 month at a time. And so it's pretty darn easy. And so that's what I found successful in regards to that.
Love it. Well, I'll put the link in the description of the video. And if you're watching this, like it, thumbs up. It tells us you want more content like this because this is a new channel for us. So we're really excited to be sharing this kind of material. Thanks, everyone. Bye.